357 Magnum versus 357 SIG for a dangerous animal protection round. So I'm going to compare these two, and I'm trying to be as fair as possible with comparing 357 Magnum to 357 SIG. So I got 180 grain hard cast with both. This is double tap ammunition, and our 357 Magnum is rated at 1420 feet per second through a 6-inch barrel. Our 357 SIG is rated at 1,055 feet per second through a 4-inch barrel. So, you know, this should be kind of fair because I'm using a 4-inch barrel, 357 Magnum, instead of the 6-inch that's rated from. Instead of the 4-inch that's rated from, I'm using a 5-inch. And the reason why these barrel lengths is because a 4-inch revolver is the same barrel travel as a 5-inch semi-auto. So 180 grain with both. Both of them have, you know, 4 inches of barrel travel in those guns. So this should be a really interesting test. So I'm going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy I get at the same time with both of those, see how close they are in power. Then I'm going to do my big dangerous animal ballistic test. Now, this is not specific to any specific animal. I'm not claiming that this is like a bear or anything like that. All I'm doing here is I'm doubling up my normal test. Normally I have like 4 layers of fabric, 3 inches of clear ballistics, a 1/4 inch MDF, 16 inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4 inch. So I'm doubling everything, except for, you know, this pack of fabric. It's a little bit thicker than 8 layers. Just a bunch of fabric there to represent hitting animal hide. Then we have 6 inches of clear ballistics. Then we have 2 1/4 inch MDF, so a full 1/2 inch MDF. Then we got 32 more inches of clear ballistics, then another 1/2 inch medium density fiberboard, and then some more clear ballistics. So that's double. So, you know, we can still compare, you know, what kind of penetration we get with both of those to see if there's a big difference between 357 Magnum and 357 SIG. And then I am going to shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability these have. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up we have our 357 Magnum 180 grain hard cast, rated at 1420 feet per second through a 6-inch barrel. Let's see how close we get to that in this 4 1/8 inch Smith & Wesson 686. So see how close we get to 1420 feet per second. $12.84, $13.14, $12.80, $12.50, $12.17. Let me do one more. $12.81. So not super consistent. I'd like to see more consistency. But let's see how close our 357 SIG is to that. And this is rated at 1055. So I don't think we'll reach that with an extra inch of barrel, but let's see what we get here. $10.44, $10.46, $10.39, $10.17, $9.96. So nowhere even close to that rate of velocity that they show through a 4-inch barrel, through a 5-inch barrel. A little bit disappointing, but that doesn't necessarily mean it won't do bad for, you know, dangerous animal protection. Because, you know, 180 is very heavy. You know, a lot of 9mm rounds will do about that velocity with a 147 grain. So 357 SIG, you're doing that with a 180 grain. Might make a big difference. So let's say our ballistics gel block and see how these compare. All right, our big dangerous animal simulation test. So we got a whole bunch of fabric there, just various fabric. I didn't even count the layers, just to try to simulate thick animal hide the best I could. 6 inches of clear ballistics, a 1/2 inch medium density fiberboard, 32 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/2 inch at the back, and then a little bit more clear ballistics. So let's see what we can do here. I'm going to do a couple shots of each caliber and then go take a look. So let's see what we get here with our 357 Magnum. Wow. Let me do one more. Go take a look. All right, let me do one more. It looks like it went through all that, but it didn't. it left the block to the left and then skidded along the side of that back block and left a mark that's not actually in that back block. So I'm gonna have to go over a little bit more to the right. So one more shot here. Go take a look. Yeah, that's why I had to do multiple shots, because yeah, you can never tell. Sometimes, like the first shot, it went down kind of, and that might not be valid because it kind of went down. It does look like it stopped in there, but it hit the bottom of the shelf. And with that shot, we actually can see up here that it does have a gas check, I believe. That's got to be what that is. And then that second shot, it basically clipped the edge of the back rib simulation and then skidded along this. But our third shot is definitely valid here, because we went more center, nothing weird happened here. So with that first shot, you have about another 3.5 inches on that 36. So, you know, just shy of 40 inches with that going through 2 rib simulations. So that's a lot of penetration, to be honest there. That's pretty good. Now with our second shot there, we got about, I know parallax will throw this way off. Parallax is sometimes why it looks like I'm leaning back when I'm shooting, when I'm actually not at all. It also stretches where these bullets line up on this particular camera. So we're about another 7 inches on top of that there. So yeah, about 43 inches of penetration with that second shot. So 43 inches here. And then I'm going to say this is, you know, a half representation of the density. So you're talking like, you know, 20, I would say 22, 24 inches in an actual living animal, just because of the rib simulation and everything. So I would say you're going to get a couple of feet penetration through something like a bear or something like that. So pretty good overall. Well, let's try our 357 SIG. All right, our 357 SIG, same bullet weight. Really the only difference here is pretty much velocity. There might be an ever so slightly different size diameter depending on what bullet they used. Maybe 355, 356 versus 357 or 358. But they may have used the same bullet for all I know. But a little bit less velocity, quite a bit less, a couple hundred feet per second, almost 300 feet per second less. So we'll see if that really affects things that much. So 357 SIG, let's see how this does. And like before, it's doing that thing. Let me do a couple more here. So take a look. Let me do one more. I was out of ammo. Let me just put one more in there. Now let's go take a look. Oh, so kind of unpredictable on that second shot. That first shot, not really that valid, just because it went underneath this block and it skidded along the shelf there and then happened to land right there. Our second shot got really far penetration. Our third shot did not. So, and really what that is from that change in velocity. When you pack a lot of more velocity on there, you can get that straight line penetration. That's really what the velocity does, because if you're not moving fast enough, a bullet that's that long has very high sectional density. You start to induce a huge wobble, and that can be very unpredictable. So with the one that didn't wobble, we got about another 4.5 inches there. So about 40.5 inches of penetration, that's good. But because of that low velocity, we got that wobble here. And we only got about 27.75 inches with our 357 SIG. So here's the trade-off. A 357 Magnum had double the recoil, but it's very consistent. A 357 SIG, that was like basically like shooting a 40 Smith & Wesson. I mean, we're talking about the same velocity out of this pistol as a 180 grain 40 Smith & Wesson. So honestly, I've tested 40 Smith & Wesson hardcasts that went through like this entire setup with hardcasts, and the sectional density makes more sense with that. So honestly, I don't see a point to this particular 357 SIG because you're not going to get enough velocity on that high sectional density to keep it moving in a straight line. So personally, I'm going to say it's a fail. I'm not going to say it would necessarily fail to stop a big animal. You got a lot of capacity there. But with the 357 Magnum, you know for sure it's gonna pretty much do the same thing every time and go in a straight line because of that extra velocity. So decent performance with our 357 Magnum. You know, we had good power, really good power actually, because most of the 158 grain rounds that I fire through this revolver will do about the velocity that this 180 grain did. So very good power level. Absolutely would recommend this 357 Magnum. But the 357 SIG, you know, unless you got a carbine or something, I would not recommend this. So interesting test. Let's pull these out of block. We'll take a closer look at these bullets, and then I'll shoot our steel, see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. All right, so we're going to take a look at these bullets here, and I just wanted to show this MDF. A lot of people say that I shoot through the exact same channel, and this is a 6-inch square of MDF. This is the size of the actual gel blocks, 6 inches by 6 inches. So this is 6 inches by 6 inches. I space these out. When I do my normal tests, I'm like here, 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 and here. And I'll take another shot on this side, on the facing side that you see. And people are like, you shot through that channel, because they don't understand that the blocks are 6 inches wide as they are tall. So I'm way over here when I make another shot. So this is my normal pattern. I did take a couple in the center there, and those two got kind of close, but I just want to make a point of that. That's how that is. And also my gel blocks are stored inside the house year round. And for some reason people think I don't know what they think. They think I bring these out a day before or something and leave them out to freeze, and that alters things. It's like, that's not what I do. In fact, when I cut out bullets, when it's really cold, I'll put my fingers in the gel to actually warm them up, because it remains at, you know, 65, 68 degrees, whatever they were when they're in my house. And only about a 1/4 inch in does it take on the cold of the outside. So they're really the same all the time. But here's our bullets, and there is a big difference here in our bullets. I may have said already that, or I may say in a minute here, that they might be the same bullets, because I do film this after I'd shoot, but I put it in here before I do my shooting at the steel. But these are definitely different bullets from the SIG to the Magnum. And they did have gas checks. That's one of them. There's a bunch of them in the gel. Our Magnums are a wider, shorter bullet. Our SIGs are kind of a weird hourglass shaped bullet. So our Magnums are long bullets, but they're a little bit shorter. And our SIGs are all these hourglass shape, where they're big at the nose, get skinny, and then get a little bit wider towards the base. So it's just kind of interesting, you know, what these things look like. There's our Magnum, here's our SIG. You can see when I line that up, our SIG is actually a little bit taller. So there's no wonder why they're having problems, potentially tumbling and whatnot. One of these was really bent. I believe it's this one. This is the one I believe I pulled out where it didn't penetrate very far. And we can see it's really bent. So that is just way, way, way too long to get any benefit from loading that in a 357 SIG. You know, if you put 180 grains in a 40 caliber, you would shrink that down a little bit. You would lower your sectional density, and you know, theoretically that might not penetrate as far as a higher sectional density when this is moving straight, but this is not going to move straight. So you're better off with a 40 caliber hard cast if you got a 40 357 SIG pistol if you want to get some dangerous animal protection, because the 357 SIG is really optimized for 125 grain bullets. It's a great cartridge in that respect, but trying to do this out of it, just not a good idea. But our Magnum, fantastic performance overall. So that's a close-up look at those bullets. All right, so with rounds like this, what I like to do is kind of a dual purpose testing of it, because they're not really self-defense rounds in the traditional sense. So what I like to do is stay at 25 yards, fire off some shots relatively rapidly to see what it might take to like stop a charging Bigfoot, something like that. And then back up to 75 yards and fire a little bit slower to see how they might do as hunting rounds. So, you know, you could do both purposes with rounds like this. So let's see what I can do with our 357 Magnum from 25 yards. I'm just going to get a front sight picture. I am going to have to line up these sights, but I'm going to try to fire as quickly as I think I can hit the target. So 357 Magnum. That stuff has quite a wallop. You know, it doesn't translate on camera, but that is loud and that hits the steel hard. So dropped one out. 357 SIG. Let's see how this does. Wow. They're going all over the place. I was lining up those sights and I just saw them hitting all over, missing the target. I don't understand what exactly is going on with that. Let me back it up from 75 yards and fire slower and see how these do as hunting simulation rounds. All right, 75 yards from the target, basically our hunting simulation. So let's see what I can do with these, see how these things will hit from some distance. So I used to hunt whitetails. Never took one with a handgun. I did shoot at one once 15 years ago and missed it, but I took some with rifles and shotguns. But I suppose if I was going to try to take maybe a deer or something, I would be firing single action. So let's see what I can do with our 357 Magnum from 75 yards. Don't got a clue where that went. It's that last one. So 4 out of 6. Not great, but when they did hit, they hit really hard. And it's likely the misses are just based on my skill and not the ammo. Because if I can hit most of them, that generally indicates that. And they were really accurate up close. With this 357 SIG, I noticed when I was chronographing, the rounds weren't even close to where I was aiming. And then at 25 yards, the same thing. So I'm not sure what's going on. It looked like they were shooting high, really up close. So I don't know. I'll just aim center mass with a 357 SIG. See how this does. Yep, I don't have a clue where they're going. My gut feeling says they're going high. That doesn't make sense, but let me aim low. I can't see any impacts. That one I saw, I was aiming center mass on that last one. That one I saw, it looked to me like it hit high and right by over 10 feet. So for whatever reason, this gun does not like that. You know, what I'm thinking probably is going on is 180 grain is quite heavy for 357 SIG. I mean, it's got that bottleneck case. You're going to have a lot of that bullet down in that case. It makes sense why we're not getting high velocity. But that sectional density for that power level, it's telling me that it's doing the same thing in flight as what it's doing in that ballistics gel, where it's wanting to wobble before it gets to the target. Because that would be the only thing that would explain 10 feet high and right. You know, I'm not the best shot in the world, but I'm not that bad. So, yeah, I'm seeing that this 357 SIG is not that great. Now, our 357 Magnum, absolutely fantastic. And in a longer barrel, we'll probably would get a lot closer to that. I don't think it would hit that 1420, but I think it would be at probably 1350, 1375, something like that, out of an actual 6-inch barrel, which is a lot of power. That's beating a lot of 10 millimeters. So fantastic load for our 357 Magnum, but for our 357 SIG, I would completely avoid that. If you got a 40 and you've converted it to 357 SIG, I'd say convert it back to 40. And do some 40 hard cast and I'd say stick to 180 grain, because once you get to 200 grain, you start losing a lot of power. When you're at a 180 grain, you retain most of the 40's power, and the sectional density is a little bit less, so you don't get that wobble, but it's still high enough to penetrate really well. So interesting test overall. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.